It's been said that 3 of life's biggest stresses are changing jobs, moving, and getting married. 2 of those were behind Hannah and I, while the 3rd was underway. We were married several months ago, both relocated jobs to southern Texas, and were currently in the final stages of closing on a new home in a beautiful subdivision just outside of the city. It was a new build and still heavily under construction. Part of the neighborhood was finished and much was still undeveloped, save for some paved roads throughout the cleared land surrounded by thick forest in most directions. Hannah and I were excited as we entered the office of the builder located inside of the model home. We were also filled with that sick feeling in your gut that you may be making a huge mistake. I guess this is normal when making any large purchase. It didn't sit right with me handing over a closing check of nearly $30,000. The anxiety was soon taken away when the salesman took us inside the home once more. It was beautiful, with a large island in the kitchen that merged seamlessly into an open concept living room, furnished with brand new appliances, and both bathrooms were spacious. The large bedrooms were complemented by beautiful hardwood floors. A big backyard was more than we needed, as we had no children or pets, but Hannah was already in design mode. I could see it in her eyes. After the salesman felt confident he had sealed the deal, we returned to the front office to finish paperwork, so that we could retrieve our keys. From inside the office, we could hear a commotion several offices down. A Hispanic man was agitated and speaking loudly, sometimes even yelling at one of the salespeople. From what little we could hear and broken English we could make out, he was threatening to walk off the job site. He said that he and his crew were not going to work in the back, undeveloped area any longer, as it is bad. Bad. What did he mean by bad? Bad land, he said. No good, evil. That was a strange conversation to overhear. It wasn't any more reassuring when the man stormed out of the office holding his hard hat under his arm. Covered in sweat and visibly upset as he removed his yellow safety vest, he stopped for a brief moment at the doorway of the office Hannah, and I sat in as we waited for the salesperson to finish typing. He gave us a strange look, almost cursing us for buying the home. Or maybe pleading with us, warning even. Looking back now, I wish I had listened to my gut. The salesman apologized and walked over to shut the door, giving us more privacy. I'm so sorry, guys. Sometimes our workers can be a bit cranky, overworked due to the amount of people moving here lately. Slightly behind schedule, and with supplies in short order, it makes things even more tense, he explained. Hannah looked at me and then back to the salesman. What did he mean by bad land, evil land? She asked. The salesman shook his head. You know, our construction foreman is from Mexico. He and some of his crew are very superstitious. If the weather is off, or he finds a beetle on his boot, they kind of freak out, you know. I wouldn't think on it too much. What is important, though, is that after we sign these closing documents, I'm handing you the keys to your new home, he exclaimed, successfully taking our attention from the incident as Hannah lit up. I can remember vividly picking the home we purchased for 2 main reasons. Location and location. It was on a cul-de-sac in the back of the neighborhood, and behind us were no neighbors. If you were to peek over the back fence, you would see trees and more trees that were being cleared by the construction crew working for the builder. They were prepping the area and land for new homes to be built. We were brought to a startle one afternoon when sirens filled the area. The fence was tall in our backyard, so we grabbed a couple of step stools and placed them along the back fence to get a better look. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cruisers littered the area. This lasted for the remainder of the evening until finally, long into the night, it was quiet, dark, and empty. It was after this that the workers had cleared out, and I mean really cleared out. They packed up nearly everything they could carry, leaving only empty, half-paved roads that were meant to be neighborhood streets and raw materials lying around. Piles of lumber, cement still in bags, cords, and even generators were scattered throughout the area. In the distance, we could see dump trucks, scrapers, and a few small excavators left behind. They just abandoned all this stuff and left. After a few days, Hannah and I stopped by the office to pick up our pool gate access card for the community pool. We hadn't had time, and we missed the big neighborhood mixer where they issued them. As we approached the office, we noticed a sign hanging from the window. Attention current and future residents of Harrington Trails. Due to supply shortages and complications, the second area of Harrington Trails construction will be postponed until further notice. We will not currently be taking applications or scheduling viewings as all available homes have been sold. Thank you for your understanding and check back with us soon as the situation may change quickly. Fancy way of saying our construction crew hightailed it, and we can't get another to come work here, an older Hispanic man walking his dog behind us said. Hannah walked over to him and I followed. What happened here? She asked. The man nodded towards the back area of the community, towards the part of the subdivision that was under construction, towards the direction our home sat. Few weeks back, David Aguilera, the construction foreman, and his crew found some weird stuff out in the woods. Some markers or totems or something. They didn't want to work here no more. They said it was bad land, the man explained as he pulled at his little dog's leash to keep him from climbing onto my leg. I reached down and petted him. How do you know? Did you know the workers? I asked. The man nodded. Son, I'm 74 years old, I'm retired, and have a wife I can't get away from. I make it a habit to wander and get to know people. Good point, actually. If you want to know gossip or anything about anything in an area, find the elderly who have too much time on their hands, I thought to myself. So, what happened? Why did they all leave? Hannah asked. The man finally picks his little dog up to control him better. One of David's crew got hurt. A guy in a bulldozer was backing up, and there wasn't a flagger behind him to make sure the coast was clear. The man said he looked behind him just in time to see one of his friends being run over, flattened out by the huge tread. Hannah places her hand over her mouth. Oh my God. The man nods again and continues. Yeah, but strange thing is, when they move the dozer and call the police, there is no one. No body, blood, nothing. Cops and everyone looks around, thinking maybe the man lived and was in shock, and that he may have crawled out into the woods or something, but nothing, no sign of him. So, there was a mistake. Maybe the man wasn't hurt, maybe he wasn't even hit, I responded, shocked. The old man shook his head. Well, David and his crew sure as hell think there was. They went over roll call and saw they were indeed a man short, but they decided not to say any more to the police because some of them are undocumented workers. They did, however, as you can see, clear the hell out of here. As the words left the old man's lips, a voice from the office door behind us called out, Hey you two, here for your pool access cards. It was one of the salespeople holding 2 key cards and smiling. We nodded to the old man and thanked him. He told us his name before leaving, shook my hand, and sat his dog back down to continue his walk. We grabbed our cards and thanked the salesperson, then continued on our way home, both kind of in shock and not knowing what to make of the story. I laid in bed a few nights after that, thinking of the foreman's words, bad land, evil land. Several weeks went by and things seemed to calm down. The builder of Harrington Trails, however, had not been able to secure a new crew for the rest of the undeveloped subdivision that was surrounded by woods. Hannah and I had been gaining a bit of weight and decided to go walk around the undeveloped area. It seemed like a good place to walk and stretch our legs, seeing as it was mostly roads, some paved and some still dirt, but surrounded by beautiful forest. It did have an eerie feel to it with all the abandoned equipment and supplies lying around. It was so strange. No one would come get it or even steal it, which was a common problem among developing communities. We walked and talked of various things past our mailboxes and into the misty darkness of the trees. Soon we found ourselves a couple of miles into the construction area, with the faintly dimming lights of our neighborhood behind us. The white concrete paved roads were visible in the darkness, but only barely. Feeling somewhat nervous to continue, we decided to not let stories and rumors of superstitions deter us from our exercise. We continued until we reached the far end of the construction site, where a wall of trees stood between civilization and the 1,000 acres or more of land that had been left untouched by time. Tall pines in the distance swayed in the wind, and the misty fog that lingered in the branches did nothing to make it all seem any less creepy. I distinctly remember Hannah making a Silent Hill joke in regards to the atmosphere. We continued our walk and decided to listen to one of our favorite podcasts to break up the silence after we had run out of things to say. A quarter of a mile further, and we rounded an unfinished road that had a collection of large spools of wires that workers would run underground prepping for plumbing, electrical, and the like. It was then that we heard the crickets, frogs, and other animals go silent. So silent, in fact, that the sounds of our footsteps became very loud, and our breathing could be heard even over the podcast. "Say Cheech," Hannah sounded as she raised her hand to stop. We stood there, me fumbling with the phone to pause the podcast. "What? Hannah, what the hell do you hear?" I asked. "Listen," she scolded. We stood there for a while, listening to the sound of utter silence until we heard something. Something that did not belong to these woods. I had lived in Texas all my life and had become familiar with coyotes, hogs, raccoons, mountain lions, brown bears, black bears, and all manner of insects, but this was walking. No animal made these sounds as they moved. It was a kind of dragging, slow, and strained walk. With each stride, we could hear a light crack and pop. Hannah grabbed the phone from my hand and found the flashlight app. She began to pan the phone around, and what we saw next fundamentally altered our lives forever. It was a figure, the figure of a man. He took a step forward from behind a front loader, half hidden in darkness, the other half in mist. As his foot met the ground, his left ankle would bend and his knee would bow inward, causing a sharp bone to protrude through his flesh and torn, dirty jeans. His right leg seemed undamaged, but if this wasn't enough, hearing Hannah's words, followed by her scream, sent the message home to run. "Babe! Babe! His head!" she shrieked as she stumbled backwards, dropping the phone. I frantically reached for the phone and grabbed it. As I rose, it shined the light towards the figure eye and could see his elongated face staring our direction. He looked at us, but his expression didn't change. Mouth was hanging open, jaw dislocated, teeth broken out with his tongue slowly moving side to side. Blood had soaked his clothing. But then I noticed this is not what Hannah screamed about. His head was facing the wrong direction. Hard Hat slumped to one side of a head facing us, while his torso, legs, and feet were twisted the opposite direction. This was the construction worker police were unable to find. He wore the uniform, hard hat, and vest the others did. There was no doubt, something other than life was making this dead man move in his distorted state. We gathered ourselves and, filled with a primal fear I've never felt in all my life, we ran. In our shock, we must not have noticed the mangled worker was beginning to move faster. Each pop and crack, each time his feet met the pavement making the sound of raw meat hitting concrete, he gained on us. An unnatural kind of speed for someone of his condition brought him within a dozen yards of us. I grabbed Hannah and ran in the direction of a dump truck. We climbed up the side and into the back of the empty bed and laid down. I was trying so hard to get Hannah to stop whimpering. Finally, we held our breath and lay still. We could hear this thing moving around the truck, looking for us. It would click and pop, its body quivering and shaking as it moved. How could this be? How is this even possible? Is this why the workers fled? Is this what they meant by bad land, evil land? We were in the back of that truck for what felt like hours as the thing slowly pieced it together. We began to hear it paw and slap itself against the tire of the truck. Hannah began to cry. I placed my hand over her mouth to silence her, and through muffled cries, I could hear tires in the distance. I peeked over the bed of the dump truck and could see flashing police lights driving around about a half-mile away. I grabbed Hannah and helped her to her feet. The creature had begun to climb up the tire and towards the bed of the dump truck. "We need to go, baby. Now, we need to go," I yelled. We jumped down the opposite side of the truck. Dump trucks are tall, so the nearly 7-foot fall was hard. I twisted my ankle and Hannah tried her best to help lift me. We looked back and could see the creature almost running backwards in our direction. Its broken body swinging with its head barely kept intact by its broken neck. Hannah loves me, I know this, but the fear inside her made her want to leave me behind. She struggled, looking ahead, back at the creature and back to me, deciding to run or stay to help me. Thankfully, she did not abandon me. We shuffled and moved as fast as we could, screaming at the police SUV until finally, the officer placed his spotlight on us. He had been patrolling the area, making sure no one was stealing construction supplies until the builder had events sorted out. He had thought we were thieves until he saw the situation, and we explained ourselves. He thought we were insane because he saw no mangled construction worker. The officer took us to the nearest and by the next morning, we were back in our home, like nothing had even happened. I can't explain what we saw that night on the undeveloped roads in those woods. I'm not sure if it was what we thought it was, or if tales of supernatural, cursed lands got away with us. I half entertained the idea of it being real, a hurt person seeking only to ask us for aid. But then I remember his injuries and how capable it seemed of movement. And I'm sure, had it reached us, I would not be here to tell this story. We didn't explain to our realtor why we wanted to sell the home. We didn't explain to anyone for fear of being labeled insane. We simply loaded up, staked the for sale sign in the front yard, and never spoke of the horror of Harrington Trails again. I was born in 1985 and grew up in the 90s. I was through and through a 90s kid, and when I wasn't riding bikes or screwing around with the other guys in my neighborhood or at school, I was playing video games. I found a very special love in them and would whisk away hours and hours mainly in RPGs or role-playing games. If it wasn't Dragon Quest, it was Final Fantasy, but my true love came in November of 1998 with the release of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Always a Zelda fan since the early days on the NES, this one blew my mind and I became somewhat of an expert, even the Water Temple. As the years went by and I got older, I had less and less time for games. Such is the curse of getting older. You have the finances for games, but not the time, a vicious joke of life. About a year ago, on my 36th birthday, my wife decided to buy me a few of the games I grew up with. To my pleasant surprise, she got me some loose copies of Mario and Duck Hunt, Final Fantasy III, and a copy of Pokémon Red for the Game Boy. I was ecstatic and worried, as I know retro video games can cost a fortune easy. This, however, sparked a fire inside of me to reconnect and own once again many, if not all, of the retro video games I grew up with. The strangest thing to ever happen to me occurred on this quest to regain part of my childhood. I learned that one of the best places to find retro video games outside of the price-gouged eBay was thrift stores, resale shops, garage sales, and flea markets. One evening, I visited a local thrift store and made a beeline for the electronics section, where old VCRs, VHS, cassettes, DVDs, and older games would be. It was a good idea to check daily, as the retro games would sell fast, as popularity has grown quite a bit over the years. I couldn't believe my eyes. There on a dusty shelf next to a rundown microwave and dirty DVD player was a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was none other than The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The label on the front was in rough shape with some fading, sun washing, and minor scratches, but it was there. I flipped it over, and on the back was an address and the words, "Happy birthday Tim, love Nana." It was written in permanent marker, of course, as many video games were back in the day, in case the child lost it, misplaced it, or there was an issue over ownership. Still, I had to have it, so I paid the low price the thrift store was asking for it and rushed home. My wife could recognize the excited look on my face. "Oh God, I know that look, and you have a bag. What did you get?" She sighed as she rummaged through the fridge. I produced the game from the bag and held it up victoriously, though she made it clear I wouldn't have peace to play until dinner was done and the kids were asleep. I carried on, and as soon as the kids were out and the wife was wrapped up in an episode of 90 Day Fiancé, I ran into the living room, loaded up the game, and booted up my Nintendo 64. Hearing the music, the soft melody that only a Zelda game can produce, sent me back to a time and place I had almost forgotten. My mission was clear: rescue Princess Zelda from Ganon, but first, Link needed to wake up, and Navi was just the ferry for the job. Time to visit the Great Deku Tree. I was right back where I left off 20 years ago in my mind, and it all began to come back to me. It had been so many years that some things I must have forgotten about. A silhouette-like shadow was always in the background somewhere in nearly every shot. Whether I was smashing pots, looking for sticks, finding rupees, or fighting seed-spitting monsters, it was always there in the back. It looked like it belonged, but also off in some weird way. Like a video game mod had been inserted into the game. It had the same textures, same cartoon style, but it was something dark that I didn't remember from when I was a kid. I brushed it off as my age catching up to me and carried on, but then the dialogue started to change. Navi began to have text bubbles pop up that said strange things that I'm positive wasn't in the game originally. Random questions and sentences like, "How did you get my game?" and "Is Dad going out again?" I was a bit freaked out. I was sure this was modding at this point. Some independent developer with an original code had been messing around and made a homebrew version of the game. I figured what the hell and carried on. Hell, it may even be fun to see a new twist on the game. Then it got stranger and darker. Going back to the Kikiri forest, I met with Seria, an elf who lives there. I have a habit to revisit NPCs throughout the story of RPGs, because many times as events change in the game, the dialogue sometimes changes as well, and it did. I stood in front of her, and like always, the dark, shadowy silhouette was in the background peeking from behind the treetop house she sat in. Her dialogue box popped up as I interacted with her, and I became cold. "Why are you playing my game?" it read. I sat there kind of frozen for a second. I looked over my shoulder to see if anyone else was seeing the insanity that was playing out, only to remember I was the only one in the dark living room. There was no keypad, no keyboard, no way for me to respond, so I did the only thing an insane person would do, and I verbally answered, not really knowing why or what to expect. I bought this game. I pressed it on the remote control to bring up the next dialogue, and it read, "This is my game. My name is on it. If I lose another game, Dad is going to be mad at me and Mom again." I got cold chills on my body. I immediately turned it off and walked to my bedroom to find my wife already asleep and the TV still running. I wanted to wake her so bad, to tell her what happened, but I knew she'd be upset and surely not believe me. I decided that it was a mod, had to be, and probably one of the best I'd ever seen. I had to tell myself so I could finally sleep. I decided to take a day and not play, to let it roll off my mind and maybe approach it later with a clear head. The following weekend, when the kids were at their grandparents' with their mum, I decided to give it another go. I booted up, hopped in and left the Kikiri forest. I made my way to a town and entered the windmill where an NPC with a kind of phonogram was standing. I assumed he wanted to teach me a song on the ocarina, so I approached, and there beside him, just behind the wooden beam, was the shadow. I interacted with the NPC and the dialogue box popped up. This was my favorite game. It read. I sat there once again with chills throughout my body. I knew this had to be a mod, but to humor it, I wanted to see how deep the developer went, how predictive the coding would be. I assumed it had a set number of responses that would generally answer whatever it was asked to make it seem like it was communicating with the player. It was quite ingenious, so I gave it a go. This is my favorite game too. I replied out loud in my living room. I interacted again with the NPC to bring up the next dialogue box. The text box returned. "That's so cool. I don't really have friends and my dad doesn't let me play much, but Mom lets me. I'm glad I met someone else that loves Zelda as much as me." It read. "Oh, this is good," I thought. "How has no one found this mod before?" I had to show my wife, but first I wanted to keep going to see how deep the developers of the mod went. I thought hard and asked, "Why doesn't your dad let you play? Are you grounded or something?" I pressed her to bring up the response from the phonograph holding NPC. "Dad doesn't let me do anything. He wants me to stay in my room. In my closet sometimes all night, but Mom lets me play when he's gone. She's my only friend and you too now. Why doesn't your wife let you play?" My throat closed up and sank into my stomach. This was far too specific to be coding. This was no mod. This thing was talking to me through the Legend of Zelda. It had no way to communicate other than by hijacking NPC text boxes. How did it know I was married? How did it know I had a wife? I wanted to run, to throw it away or submerge it in water to destroy the data. But I remembered. If this was really happening, if I'm not going completely insane, then this is a kid in there, and I wanted to know what happened. "Is your name Tim? Did your grandma give this game to you?" I asked out loud. I brought up the next dialogue box, and it read, "Yeah, I'm Timothy. My nana gave me this game because Dad won't let Mum buy me nothing. He comes home from going out and gets mad, so I can't play it often though." I shook my head and jumped right into the next question before I lost my nerve. "What happened to you, Tim? How are you able to see and talk to me?" The dialogue box returned. "Dad is home. I have to go. I have to go right now," it read. I tried to shout out a reply, but I watched the shadow fade away behind the NPC, and soon the dialogue box returned to the normal words of the man teaching me the song on the ocarina. I was blown away and at a complete loss for why this was happening or how. The next day I decided to make an excuse to go to the store, but I grabbed the copy of the game before I left. I opened up my GPS and typed in the address on the back of the cartridge. Taking the longest shot in the dark I have ever taken in my life outside of asking my wife to marry me, I drove to the address. I walked up to the door and knocked. A woman about my age opened the door. I could hear children in the background. Yelled at them over her shoulder that she was busy and to pipe down, that she'd be right back. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hesitated. How the hell do I explain why I'm here? It's insane, so I just asked what popped into my mind. "Does Timothy live here?" She had a half annoyed and half shocked look on her face. "Timothy? I think you may have the wrong house, dude," she replied, half chuckling. I shook my head and looked down. She was about to close the door when I reached into my pocket and pulled out the game and flipped it over to show the writing and address. "I'm sorry, I know this is creepy and weird, but I bought this game at the thrift store in town, and this address was on the back. She grabbed it from my hand and had tears welling up in her eyes. "Mister, where the fuck did you get this?" she replied with her voice breaking. I explained to her again how I got it, and a bit about what had been going on that brought me to her doorstep regardless of how insane it sounded. She had, by this point, shut the door behind her and was sitting on the front porch with me sobbing as she told me what I wouldn't believe had I not been there myself. Timothy was my little brother. My dad decided, for whatever reason, that Tim was going to be his punching bag. I ran away to my grandma's, to this house right here. That's Nana on the back of the game. Tim wouldn't leave Mom. He refused to abandon her, and one day Dad came home drunk. He was beating Mom and Tim and had locked them in the closet. He set the house on fire and then shot himself in the head while he sat in his lazy boy. This game was in the house. I don't understand how you have this. I don't understand why this is happening. She cried out as her kids peeked through the front window worried about their mom. I apologized and said my farewell. She made me take the game with me. She said her brother is gone, that it hurts too bad to imagine him not being at some kind of peace. I drove home and went to my backyard and lit my grill. I tossed the game inside and let it burn. I'm so very sorry, Timothy. Some games are better left unplayed. The detective straddled his chair and slid a water bottle to the kid that sat opposite him. The 20-something college student was tired, disheveled, and visibly shaken, but the detective had seen some damn good actors in his day. He cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Green, Evan Green," the kid supplied, his voice barely more than a murmur. A quick glance at the file on the table and a confused cock of his eyebrow, the detective amended, "Right, Mr. Green. Our records show that Miss Atwell filed 3 separate reports this year claiming an unknown man was stalking her. She said he." The detective once again glanced down at the open folder in front of him, hacked into her smart home device. The student looked at the detective with something akin to impatience. "Yes, I've already told you guys this. Just relax," the detective said, raising his hand in a passive gesture. "Why don't you start from the beginning? How did you know Miss Atwell?" Evan's eyes glazed over as he thought back to the first time he saw Holly in Kin 100 and began verbally conveying it to the detective. She wasn't the prettiest girl at KCU, or even the prettiest girl in the class, to be honest. She was average height, a little on the curvy side, reddish hair, and an unremarkable face. He didn't know why he was drawn to her, but he was. It may have been her demeanor, very friendly and approachable. Regardless of her appearance, she would never notice or talk to Evan. It was his own fault, he realized, as he was the type to intentionally blend in with the background, but it stung, nonetheless. He wanted to get close to her, know more about her, but he didn't know how. That was, until he saw a YouTube video that gave him the idea. If you had someone's IP address and a decent grasp of coding, you could access any device that was connected to their Wi-Fi. This meant cameras, microphones, TVs, printers, all of it. He could have his own private window into her life. He could finally know everything about her. All her likes, dislikes, hobbies, favorite songs, movies, foods. He would know her better than anyone. Being a gamer, he was already pretty adept at computers, so it only took him a handful of tries to bring his plan to fruition. He still remembered the first time his computer screen filled with the image of her living room camera. Holly wasn't there, so he got a chance to take in every detail of her home. She was staying in a little 2-bedroom townhouse a few miles from campus in the seedier part of town, but her place was nice inside. Cozy and tasteful, yet fun. The way college girls like to decorate. After that little tease, he quickly began hacking into every device he could. He wanted to see every square inch of her life. He'd gained access to her security cameras, her webcam, and her Echo Dot when he saw her front door open through the living room camera. His breath caught in his throat when her distinct copper hair came into view. It was her. His eyes locked on her every movement as she went through the mundane motions of getting home from work. She threw her purse and keys on the counter, hung up her coat, and kicked her shoes off before heading to her bedroom. Evan anxiously switched to the webcam on her laptop to continue the show. Holly reached under her shirt and, after fidgeting for a moment, produced her bra and threw it on her bed with a sigh of relief. Evan felt the blood rush to his cheeks and was suddenly conflicted. Was this wrong? He wanted to know more about her, which seemed innocent enough, but was this crossing a line? He resolved the dilemma by promising himself he'd look away when necessary. He wanted to leave some surprises to be uncovered in person, he told himself. Once Holly had changed into a more comfortable t-shirt and shorts, she went about her evening with a dinner of leftover soba noodles, homework on the couch, then a few episodes of Gilmore Girls before showering and going to bed. Not long after she fell asleep, Evan set her security camera's motion detectors to push notifications to his phone, and then shut his computer down. He tried to sleep that night to little avail. He couldn't wait to see her again. He would jump at every little vibration from his phone, and eventually gave in to his desires. At just after 4 a.m., he booted up his computer and connected to her cameras. He watched her for hours, just sleeping. Those hours swiftly turned into days, then weeks. Only taking breaks for class, food, and hygiene, his life was all but consumed by it. He had already learned her routine, where she worked, who her friends and family were, her painful recent breakup, and even what courses she was taking next semester, which he planned his around. By the 3rd month of this, he was growing restless. He needed more. He found himself getting increasingly interested in the Echo Dot speaker, and finally rationalized to himself that there was no way she would recognize his voice. If he messed up his attempt bad enough, maybe she would just blow it off as Alexa being weird. All he knew is he had to try. Being a silent observer wasn't enough anymore. Swallowing back a shaky breath, he clicked connect on the Echo Dot. Holly was mindlessly browsing Pinterest on her sofa when a male voice filled the room, making her jump. "Hey, Holly," it said. Evan watched her perplexed face nervously. She looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice. He spoke into his headset again to clarify. "Your Echo Dot." Her eyes fell on the device sitting on her entertainment center. Her expression was somewhere between confused and terrified. What the hell? "You want to talk?" he asked timidly. She got to her feet and approached the Echo Dot. "Are you a person?" "Yeah." "Who are you, and what are you doing in my dot?" "I just wondered if..." "Get out of my house right now. I'm calling the cops." Evan felt his heart racing. This was not going well. "I'm not going to hurt you or anything, I just..." Holly immediately unplugged her Echo Dot and called the police. Evan was defeated, but listened in on her call to make sure she didn't have anything incriminating. Based on what he heard, the cops pretty much brushed her off altogether, which made the sting of rejection dull under the joy of relief. The one thing he had going for him was that she didn't know he was integrated into all her other devices. He could even change her thermostat if he'd wanted to. However, she left her Echo Dot unplugged for the next 2 weeks, and he waited another week before trying to talk to her again. This time when he reached out, he waited until she was in the right state of mind. She'd just watched Interstellar and was caught up in her feels, so it was the right moment. "Do you miss your family?" he asked. She immediately threw her blanket off her lap and instinctively grabbed her phone. "I don't know who you are, but please leave me alone. I just wanted to talk. I know you're lonely too." Oops. That was too personal, too intimate. He could sense in her demeanor that her annoyance was transitioning to fear. He didn't want that. "I mean, aren't we all, in our own way?" Without another word, she took her phone, purse, and keys and left the house. He could see through the front yard camera that she called the cops again and drove away in her car. What she didn't do, though, was unplug the Echo Dot. A small win, maybe. Not pushing his luck, Evan elected to wait another week before contacting her. It went about the same as last time, her asking to be left alone and quickly leaving. But again, she didn't unplug the device. This process was repeated another dozen or so times, with Evan shaving a day off each time he waited to talk to her before it was simply an everyday occurrence. It eventually reached the point of being such a commonplace event that Holly stopped being scared of him and either argued with him or simply ignored him, depending on her mood. He preferred the days she argued. She was funny when she was mad and ended up making him laugh more than hurting his feelings. This, of course, pissed her off more, but it just made him fall for her that much more. The detective leaned forward when Evan stopped talking. He could see in the younger man's somber expression that he was reaching the critical part of the story. And then what happened? The detective prodded, snapping Evan out of his reverie. Evan sighed and continued. Last night I disconnected like I always do after 8 p.m, so we both can work on schoolwork or eat or shower for an hour or two. Nothing out of the ordinary. It had actually been a pretty good day, he recalled. Christmas break had just started, so Holly was in a good mood. She was packing for her flight back to her hometown in La Porte, Texas, and humming all the while. He liked the sound of her singing so much that he just sat and listened. He probably would have watched her until he went to bed if he hadn't had a trip of his own the next morning. And now, he wished he had. When he logged back in later that night, he didn't see Holly in her usual spot on the couch. He assumed she was in the shower, based on the little bit of light coming from the crack under her bathroom door. She would likely be out in a few minutes, as she was not one to linger in the shower. Evan was content to wait until she got out, but he noticed movement on the backyard camera. It was already dark out, so it was difficult to make out what the movement was. His heart dropped when he realized what it was. Without hesitation, he connected to her Echo Dot. "Holly," he yelled. She was just stepping out of the bathroom, towel drying her hair, when she heard the slightly artificial voice of the stranger in the Echo Dot coming from her living room. She groaned, knowing this creep was going to ruin her good mood. "Can you not do this tonight? Please?" she begged as she walked into the living room and plopped down on the sofa. Evan checked the views from the other cameras as he replied, "Holly, there's someone in your house." She paused for a moment, a little taken aback. The stranger was annoying, yes, a stalker even, but he'd never done anything beyond try to talk to her. Pulling a prank to start conversation was a little out of character for him. Mentally smacking herself, she realized she didn't know him. The guy hacked into her Echo Dot to get her attention. Making up a lie for the same reason was not a stretch of the imagination in the least. Evan didn't have time to let her sort through her mental dilemma. He could see the intruder had stopped sneaking through her kitchen and was now hiding under the table, trying not to be seen by Holly, who was now only a few yards away. "You need to leave. Now. He's in the kitchen," he whispered harshly. "Look, I don't want to deal with this bullshit tonight. Go away or I'm calling the cops," she retorted, ignoring his desperate warning. "Good," he said. "Yes, call the cops." His response had clearly caught her off guard again. Enough so that she began to look concerned. "Get out of the house. Get in your car. Please, Holly, listen to me." Now unnerved, Holly glanced into her unlit kitchen. She didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but foolishly believed the stranger. A chill ran through her. Were her cabinets open? In abject horror, Evan watched as Holly stood to approach the dining room, and the intruder, now realizing he was about to be discovered, burst out from under the table. Holly's eyes widened. "Derek!" The man's face was obscured by a hoodie, but Evan knew that name. It was her ex. The painful breakup he'd heard her talking about months ago. Derek didn't say anything. He just growled and lunged at Holly. She screamed a sound he'd never forget and nearly tripped over herself trying to run for the front door. Derek, a larger man, easily grabbed her arm and tried to reel her in. Evan was yelling anything he could think of to stop her ex or help Holly. With a twist, she managed to free herself of the Derek's hold. He would have had again, but he lost his footing in the blanket she had dropped on the floor moments earlier. Knowing the few seconds she'd gained weren't enough to make it through the 2 locks on her front door, Holly darted for the bathroom. "The window! Climb out the window!" Evan directed. Derek knew Holly wasn't going anywhere when he heard the bathroom door lock, and took the time to rip the Echo Dot off the entertainment center and threw it against the wall. Evan's only way to help her laid in pieces on the floor. All he could do was watch as Derek slowly, almost patiently headed in the direction of the bathroom. Evan could see from a quick glance at the feed from the backyard camera that Holly had only just opened the window and hadn't even begun to work her way out. Derek was beginning to kick in the door, and, with this being an older, cheaper house, was definitely making short work of the paper-thin obstacle. The door splintered. Holly was screaming. Evan couldn't breathe. He couldn't see anything. There were no cameras he could look through to make sure Holly was okay. The only view he had was of the door finally yielding to Derek's boot and him disappearing into the bathroom, where he knew Holly was begging for her life, apologizing for hurting him, doing and saying anything she could to stop him. He had to save her, somehow. Pulling the cameras up on his phone, he raced out of his dorm. He didn't have a car, the buses weren't running this late, and getting to her house on foot would take too long. A taxi? He didn't have any money. Fuck it, he'd have to run. It was 3 miles from campus, so he'd better run fast. The sound of Holly sobbing hysterically demanded his attention as he broke out in a sprint in her direction. He only redirected his gaze away from the phone long enough to make sure he didn't run into anything, but was firmly fixed on watching Holly struggle in Derek's grasp as he drug her by her hair into the living room. He struck her across the face and threw her on the floor before repeatedly kicking her in the face and sides. Her wails of pain and fear spurred Evan to run harder. Even through the 7-inch display of his phone, he could see that she was already badly hurt. Blood was oozing from her nose and mouth. Her breath came in shallow grunts from having her ribs kicked in, and what looked like teeth were scattered on the carpet around her. Derek barely gave her a moment to stop reeling from the last attack before he began another. He knelt on top of her and wrapped his hands around her throat, tightening his grip until her face, red from blood and trauma, started to turn purple. She choked and gurgled. Her battered lungs fought to draw breath while her survival instincts took over. All the while he was spitting obscenities in her face, calling her a whore, a slut, a worthless piece of shit. Holly did everything she could think to do. She shoved, she punched, she kicked, she scratched. None of it worked. Her ex was already nearly twice her size, and she was beginning to see stars from both pain and lack of oxygen. Her world started to go dark. Evan saw her go limp and knew she'd passed out. He wasn't sure, but he didn't think she was dead. All he could hope now was that Derek would think she was dead and leave. Please, please, please. He prayed as he watched the hooded figure get to his feet and look at her for a moment before wordlessly heading toward the kitchen. Evan's heart lifted. Was he leaving? That brief moment of hope was instantly destroyed when, rather than walking to the back door, Derek went for the knife block on the counter. He selected the carving knife and returned to Holly right as she began to wake up. When the fog of confusion cleared, Holly saw the man standing over her wielding the 8-inch blade and quickly turned on her stomach in an attempt to crawl away. She clawed at the floor desperately and tried to get her legs under her. She'd only made it a few feet when Derek plunged the knife into her back, piercing a lung. Evan heard her gurgled scream and helplessly watched as he pulled the blade out and began stabbing her over and over in the back, the neck, the legs, the arms, her entire body. Her struggle slowed, then stopped altogether. Evan didn't remember seeing her ex leave after that. He didn't know if the guy even tried to clean up anything, or if he just panicked and left. All he saw was Holly lying motionless on the floor. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move at all. The only thing that moved was the spreading red stain underneath her. The cream-colored rug in her living room turned a deep crimson from the blood pouring out of her. He reached her house a few minutes later, but he knew he was too late. He gathered up her still warm body in his arms and just held her, numb to all else. It wasn't until he heard sirens and saw the flashing red and blue lights that he returned to reality in any capacity. And then you guys arrested me and brought me here. Evan concluded. The detective, a veteran at remaining emotionally disconnected, asked, "You're an admitted stalker then?" It wasn't a question, but Evan confirmed all the same. Yes, but only just. It's like I said, her ex-boyfriend did it. Derek. I would never hurt her. I just what? Evan met the detective's cold gaze with defiance. I just wanted her to like me, to get to know me. I loved her, and Derek took her from me. You had access to her security cameras, and yet you didn't record the footage to corroborate your claims, correct? The detective segued to a heavy-hitting question. Why would I think to record that? Evan said with a haunted look in his eyes. I was watching the woman I love get murdered. Well, Mr. Green, the detective said with a sigh, Miss Atwell had her security cameras backed up to cloud storage, which we've accessed. Oh, thank God, Evan breathed. Now they would catch the bastard. Do you have anything to add to your story before I show you the footage? Evan furrowed his brow in confusion. What more could he add? All that was left to do was for him to positively identify. Derek, I just want the guy to pay for this. The detective produced a tablet and pulled up the very familiar living room camera feed. Without even having to look at the timestamp, Evan could tell by the image of Holly sitting on her couch in her blue owl pajamas that this was from last night, the night she died. The detective hit play, and Evan felt nausea deep in the pit of his stomach as he watched Holly arguing with him over the Echo Dot, knowing what was about to happen. It played out like he said. Derek broke in and then lunged at Holly. She escaped to the bathroom, and Derek broke the Echo Dot. But then Evan froze. He heard his voice in the video, yelling at Holly. How? The Echo Dot was broken. Her ex lowered his hood. He knew that messy, brown hair. Just before Derek chased after Holly into the bathroom, he turned and looked directly in the camera. Those eyes. He recognized those eyes. Evan stared back at himself.